Joining us in our Best Ball Mania draft in progress from the 101. That is what we are doing today on RotoViz Overtime. Myself and Shawn were just about to kick this off. We had some technical issues. Thankfully, we have been able to make the selections, but we are back up. We are running and we are ready to go. We have made 5 selections, Shawn, to this point. We get the 101 in this particular draft. We pick up Justin Jefferson at that there particular point. Then we also get Breece Hall. We get Jaylen Hurts. We also then have TJ Hockenson and Kenneth Walker to go with our start here. So 1 wide receiver, 1 tight end, 2 running backs, 1 quarterback through the opening 5 selections. 101, Shawn, that's easy. It's either Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase. We go with Justin Jefferson here. Then we get into the situation where when we are at the back end of that second round, T. Higgins goes 1 pick ahead of us. Devontae Smith goes a couple of picks ahead of us. Jalen Waddle goes just ahead of that. It leaves us in a situation where the next wide receivers are kind of the Amari Cooper, DK Metcalf here. So Jaylen Hurts is the selection to get that elite quarterback. Then we get Breece Hall, who leads off on a run of 6 consecutive running backs going in that early third round with Tony Pollard, Josh Jacobs, Ramondre Stevenson, Derrick Henry, Jahmyr Gibbs going. Then when it gets back to us in the 4th round, we're kind of hoping that Jerry Jeudy makes it back to us. He does not. He goes 2 picks ahead of us at that particular point. TJ Hockenson is the selection at the 4-12. Then it's Kenneth Walker. The first pick, Shawn, that we had much discussion about, I think, to see what we would do was that selection with Kenneth Walker at the 501, pick 49 overall. The concern being that we have 1 wide receiver, and that is an extremely good wide receiver in Justin Jefferson. We now have his stablemate in Minnesota with TJ Hockenson. We may see what we do with that Minnesota side as we move forward. But Kenneth Walker was the pick at the 501. Drake London was available, Christian Kirk, Chris Godwin, Jackson Smith and Jigba, who has now just gone off the clock. We're in a zone there where it may be quite slim pickings, even in that late 6th round and the first pick of the 7th round at a wide receiver when it does come back to us. That was kind of our joint concern. But Kenneth Walker, I think when we look at the players that have gone off after him with running backs like Miles Sanders, Aaron Jones, J.K. Dobbins, Joe Mixon, I do think that Kenneth Walker at that spot is the best pick out of the available players. What are your thoughts there? And it is a little bit tricky. If you miss out on the range where you're seeing the likes of DeAndre Hopkins, DJ Moore, Christian Watson, Terry McLaurin, the 2 Chargers wide receivers, and then Jerry Jeudy, there is a run there in that 4th round where it is very, very heavy on wide receivers. Out of the 10 picks, 9 wide receivers go. There is a bit of a slow down then, so we'll see what gets back to us, but still happy with the Kenneth Walker selection there?
Yes, and the situation that we got into really with both of the turns is that you want receivers in those slots, and yet the value is really, really poor, right? We basically have the guys who are in round 3 as being round 4 values. We have the round 4 guys in many cases being round 3 values. You're going to end up with a lot of exposure to those players throughout the course of the tournament. That doesn't mean that you're going to shy away in obvious situations, and yet you don't necessarily want to be drafting guys you're already going to have a lot of exposure to way above ADP. So if you can put together a top 3 picks where you have the potential top player at all 3 positions, I think you like that. But then you come around to TJ Hockenson, Kenneth Walker, you're again in a little bit of that same situation where the guys going next in terms of Drake London, Christian Kirk, Chris Godwin we like, but Michael Pittman, those values not as good. JSN, somebody we're going to have a huge amount of exposure to. So again, you're worried about overdrafting him in drafts where it doesn't make as much sense. So you get a couple of young running backs. Colm, I like that because we want to have at least a little bit of exposure to the idea that we could have a 2016 season. And with the ADP that we have right now, you're getting fantastic values on these running backs. In general, you still don't want to lean into that. But if the draft really pushes you in that direction and you like the players who are there, that allows you to get a little bit of that hyper fragile. In this case, just kind of using the definition in terms of any draft that has 2 or 3 early running backs. I mean, those drafts are going to be few and far between for us, but it fit really well with how this particular team came together.
Yes, we're pretty happy with how things are stacking up so far, but we just, again, Sean, we're getting nipped by the drafter here, just 2 picks ahead of us every time. Dallas Goedert was somebody who we discussed potentially at the last pick. We were hoping might have slided back to us, but we are in a situation now. We do have the Pittsburgh Steelers and Pickens and Johnson there. We have Marquise Brown there. I feel like this is a strong wide receiver area here. We also have Jahan Dotson as a potential option. So who's your preference here for the first wide receiver? Is it Pickens?
Yeah, let's go ahead and take Pickens, and then we can focus a little bit more on the second pick and decide if we want to go with Deontay Johnson or if we want to go with Marquise Brown. Obviously, if we go with Johnson, we're going to have both of those Steelers. Kenny Pickett has been very inexpensive. He's one of the best value in all of drafts. If you have both of his receivers, he's probably not going to go early. If we go with Marquise Brown, that gives us the other side of that Week 17 game with our quarterback.
I'll let you decide. I thought that was the way you were going to go, and I'll let it play. I think for the draft to potentially get Pickett with that, I think is an interesting play. The other thing is we do currently have Jaylen Hurts, so it means that we're not as pressed on who we need to get at the quarterback position now. I did mention we have 2 Vikings, that there now is 2 Steelers. I would have been interested at that point in Marquise Brown, who you mentioned as well. I'd also would have been interested if it was a solo draft and potentially getting Jahan Dotson, but Sean, that is the player now that we hope that may slide back to us. He probably won't, but we always try and play that little bit of an ADP game to see if these guys will slide down. How close is it for you between somebody at this point in time like Dotson versus Deontay Johnson?
Probably not that close, because Johnson's target earning ability is so elite. And if you expect the Steelers to bounce back really to any extent at all this season, then we're looking at Johnson as being one of the most undervalued receivers in the entire player universe. The flip side of that, or in some ways concurrent with that, we have a situation where George Pickens is one of the best breakout players. So we talked about why we didn't go with receiver at the 2-3 turn or the 4-5 turn, and this answers the question a little bit in that Pickens is someone I have ranked several rounds earlier. Johnson also someone that I have ranked earlier than he's being taken right here. We want to get solid ADP value, but especially we want to get a lot of rankings value on the team. And again, especially if that also fits with our overall plan. What we've done here is give ourselves a couple of shots at that second quarterback, whether it is Kirk Cousins with the Minnesota Vikings, Kenny Pickett with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I really like that element of it. And so then we start to look at, what games in weeks, both 16 and 17. We look at that mini tournament in week 16. If we can get through that, get multiple teams into the finals, then our chance for that big payday and just chances for the bigger paydays in that final week really skyrocket. Colm, this is a fun team in terms of the players that we have here at all the different positions. And even if we don't get quarterbacks with both of these guys, we can still play these games where we have multiple Vikings, we have multiple Steelers. We look at the other side of that. We try and play through and work for a shootout in that situation. The frustration in this draft, I think, would be the fact that in that round 2 range, we had the guys we're really looking at in terms of Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, Patrick Mahomes, T. Higgins go right ahead of us. Obviously, if you get Mahomes and Higgins just slightly farther, then you can play their week 17 game off of each other at the turn. If you have Devontae Smith making it to the 212, you can put him with Jaylen Hurts. Not necessarily expecting that because those guys are a lot more valuable than this stretch of 6 consecutive running backs that goes off immediately afterward. But those are some of the considerations that you're looking at early there in the draft.
Yeah, so at the moment now, 3 wide receivers on the roster, 2 running backs, 1 tight end, 1 quarterback. It does give you that flexibility, Sean. Sometimes when it is a little bit like, we'll check this out at the end of the draft. Would we have changed out the Hurts pick if those quarterbacks do fall into nice positions for us? But a long way to go before we have to have those discussions in this particular draft. Dotson, who I mentioned, still available. Johnson, who we didn't mention, but we've drafted a couple of times, and he is still also available. So I think we're getting into an area where 8 picks away, you can almost start to dream, almost start to hope. So it's going to be fun here as we pick through these next couple of rounds. Bateman maybe comes into consideration. James Cook, Shawn has added to the queue. Kirk Cousins. My problem with the Kirk Cousins is it feels like there's going to be some names in that area which are just too appetizing to pass up on to take, Kirk Cousins. How much, Shawn, does your feelings on Kirk Cousins outweigh winning $3 million with Kirk Cousins?
I mean, if we won $3 million with Kirk Cousins, then we could just have him in the show intro. He'd be our new favorite player.
We'd be wearing Kirk Cousins jerseys on the podcast.
Exactly. And especially with the addition of Addison, I really love his situation for the 2023 season. I think his second year in that system, we already saw how he performed in his debut campaign with it. I don't know. You'd have to have some other good values here to pass on Cousins. I do like the potential of letting him fall through and just see how far he might fall since we have the two most interesting pass catchers with him. The answer to that is not at all. He goes ahead of our spot. And so we don't even have that option. That's one of the reasons why I think it's really positive to have built in what we have with the Steelers, where we can come back with Kenny Pickett. By having built that, now we have options a little bit later. Colm, I have just the two players in the queue right here. Let's take Bateman to start, and then you can kind of argue me out of Jameson Williams. One of the reasons that we have Williams there is that Detroit factors into that Week 16 game against the Vikings. Obviously, without Kirk Cousins, it's a little bit less important, but still a shootout in that week that carried all of those players would have an excellent effect on our roster here. The next receivers going down, guys like Juju Smith-Schuster, Odell Beckham, Allen Lazard. That's a big drop in terms of pure talent and overall upside for this team.
Yeah, so that is 0 seconds left on the clock that Shawn has given me to argue outside of Jameson Williams. I think Shawn knew that was the selection that we were going to go with based on what he mentioned about Week 17, but also with the players available in and around that range. There's a lot of quarterbacks going there. Anthony Richardson, Dak Prescott, Zach Charbonnet then at running back, Daniel Jones again at quarterback, and Njoku, Michael Thomas at wide receiver. It is a little bit like we talked about on the draft last week of a flatter area. We did as well when I was making the conversation. I was quite confident that Cousins would get to us. Does go one pick ahead, but we also miss out on some of the other players in the queue, like Quentin Johnson, 3 or 4 picks before our selection as well. Dotson does go, so he would have been the preferred option for me. But obviously, when they don't make it to you, Shawn, you cannot select them. That is part of the rules of drafting. But there also, Shawn, was a comment that I received on Twitter recently when I mentioned that we went over 2,000 subscribers on the RotoViz YouTube page, and it was if I clipped up all the times during drafts that Shawn asked me who I wanted as the clock expired, that we would have at least double the amount of subscribers. So there's another one that we can get the timestamp for to add on. I really enjoyed the 0.00 seconds left.
I feel like that was the most flagrant one. Yeah,
that was the most blatant one, and I am definitely going to have to make a clip out of this particular one. So I have taken a timestamp for it, but fun times. I always enjoy it, and it is something that we've integrated well and truly into the show. But Shawn, we have at this point 9 selections in the book. I think things are looking pretty interesting based on how we started off the draft, how we then waited a little bit on wide receiver, where we do go and take our 2 running backs at that point, our elite quarterback. So it is now Jaylen Hurts. We have Breece Hall. We have Kenneth Walker. We have Justin Jefferson, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, Rashad Bateman, Jameson Williams, and TJ Hockenson. So I think we missed out on a few of our targets. This is the part we always talk after the draft, but we also have got a lot of options that we would have preferred to get. And I think those picks through the last 4 wide receivers have helped really give a balance to this roster that we would like through those opening 9 to 10 rounds. How are you feeling as we look at it with the running backs? Very pleased with elite quarterback, elite tight end. You mentioned earlier trying to get the 3 top players at those positions, or the top players at those specific positions. And it feels like with this draft so far, we have a potential opportunity to have in the zone at definitely quarterback, tight end, and wide receiver. And with those 2 young running backs, although one is coming back off a serious knee injury, there is also that potential to have that in there at that position. So I'm pretty confident in the upside of this team so far.
Yeah, and you have Walker as a little bit of a bring back in that Week 17 game for the Steelers. I think the only thing here would be, how nervous do you end up getting as we go along that Pickett will be there where he's supposed to be? We've had some listener drafts sent in where they built similarly to what we're doing here, and they picked Pickett a little bit early. Now he's going so late that if you pick him a little bit early, you don't even really have to worry that much that your ADP or that your draft capital is going to be a real issue. But we are seeing quarterbacks go off the board. One of the things I think is interesting when you decide to join drafts and you see a lot of badges, sometimes you're like, well, I'm not going to get nearly as good an ADP value in those drafts. All of those players are looking, very strongly for ADP value. And at the same time, a lot of those players are almost playing their own individual games where they're trying to build the best Week 17 team. They're a little bit less focused on winning the individual draft. And that can be great for you because it allows you to finish out your build. Sometimes when you have more wild cards in the draft, you'll have a selection like the selection in the last round against us where the Kirk Cousins pick probably doesn't really fit what they need to do. And so you worry that there could be a second pick.
That feels like that
later on.
And that there also, when somebody is right in front of you in those selections, that becomes a little bit of a fear, I guess, psychologically. But it feels like that particular drafter may have felt that the next option's a quarterback going after that there was a tier break and there was to make that pick, because that's a little bit ahead of where we would normally see him going, Shawn. But we're getting into the range now where other tight ends may have come into play. Fairmouth, if he had got back to us, may have become a consideration, particularly with the Pittsburgh side of things. He goes off the board 4 picks ahead of ours. So at the moment, Shawn, in the queue, it is Antonio Gibson, Elijah Mitchell, and Rashee Rice. We are one selection away. Tyler Boyd goes off the board. Any other names at this particular point that you're interested in slotting in there, or are they the clear options for you at this particular pick? And is it a case with it becoming a little bit flatter potentially at the positions that you would pivot into looking into those quarterbacks? I think we're a bit too early for the quarterback thoughts at this point.
Yeah. So one of the things that we can do here is we can take Gibson and set up a little bit for how we'll get to that in a second after we make our second pick. We got the back-to-back ones, obviously. Do you have a preference for Mitchell, Rice, Kendre Miller? Here, we could look at Sky Moore instead. There's a potential that he could be the guy who kind of bounces back. Colm, who do you like?
I think we go for Sky Moore potentially. Do you want to go for Rice or Sky Moore? You're the Chiefs guy.
We'll take Moore. We'll get the player who, they're being valued in very similar areas, but he has the experience in the offense now. He's being pretty heavily sold, and there are very good reasons for that. Anytime that you fail to the extent that he did as a rookie, that's a massive red flag. But Colm, I do like having now the receiver.
He did also fail as a rookie, but that doesn't mean that he is toast at the same time.
It doesn't, but it is a very.
It doesn't help the upside, yeah. But I still think there's something a little there. We have taken Rice a few times, so that was kind of the differentiator there for me. But again, this is the zone we've talked about through those 10, 11 rounds where it gets a little bit flatter if the preferred targets are not there. A lot of rookies going off in this range, a lot of second-year players as well. So they're kind of the ones that I'd be picking. Gibson, there was the option there to go with another running back. If we had one running back there, I was kind of thinking that we would have a 4 running back build here, Shawn, and kind of set it where it was. And that was appealing to me, but I also think there's some very interesting running backs that will be going between now and round 18 that we don't really want to set ourselves completely out on that. It does feel like, though, at this next turn, when we do get back, is that where you're kind of targeting to see what the options are here for quarterbacks when it comes back at the 12-12 and 13-01?
Probably not really, because when we look at the QB ADPs here, you have Russell Wilson at about 130. You have Kyler at 139, who is probably off the board when we take Jaylen Hurts that early. Then you're really looking to have only one additional QB, and you're looking to have a QB who's very inexpensive and yet fits what you've built so far and that you believe has extreme breakout potential. That would be why Kenny Pickett and Sam Howell fit so well for us. You have Carr at 143. You have Stafford 157. Bryce Young, Trey Lance. You don't get to Kenny Pickett until we're down at 175. Now, again, that's a situation
That's before
where
it gets back to us. And the call is, if we don't take him at the 1301, do we get him at the 1412? And that is the more of the discussion point than the ADP discussion, I think.
Well, even at the 1415 turn, he would be a little bit ahead of ADP. But he starts to get close enough to ADP that if there's a drafter out there who is a little bit more interested in breaking our team as opposed to building their team, or just believes that Kenny Pickett is the perfect play because he's got great breakout potential, maybe the Freiermuth drafter, for example, and that drafter has a pick just 4 slots ahead of us. So you can run into that. And that is something that we have to consider. That's one of the reasons to have selected Antonio Gibson. He's someone who is drawing, I don't know if buzz is the right term, but there's the potential that he's much more involved with this new offense that emulates a lot of what Kansas City wants to do. We know that he is an elite talent, or at least I think that we have lots of signals that he's an elite talent when he's really given that opportunity, when he's put in space. He could be the guy instead of Brian Robinson. We've talked up Robinson a little bit as well. I'm obviously a little bit more optimistic about the Washington offense than the community, but we still want to draft those guys at or below ADP because we know we're going to get a lot of different shots at them. Colm, we're coming up here to another area that just really is not interesting at all in terms of the players who are available. We have Romeo Doubs up here. I mean, you can go 20, 30 guys and not find another player that you really want.
Dobbs isn't making it to us, Shawn. I'm convinced after any player that I've mentioned prior has not made it to us. So we've one pick to go. Will Dobbs make it? I think he does. He's a clear pick here for us. We can use those 30 seconds to kind of let it roll down.
Yeah, so we'll take Dobbs. We were obviously very in on him last season. There were some mixed elements to what he did, and yet his rapport with Jordan Love seems to be the best. There's been some reporting that he could lead the team in receptions. Christian Watson has been too good to really buy that completely. So probably won't be the wide receiver 1, but there's a lot of breakout potential. And it sounds like, or just reasonably speaking, the gap between those 2 second-year players and all of the rookies that they brought in to bolster this offense for, I wouldn't say the long term, hopefully even the intermediate term and the short end of that. But Jaden Reed, somebody with a very mixed prospect profile, reasons to be excited, a couple of different years where he had elite production, reasons to be concerned in terms of his final production, in terms of his sort of age-adjusted arc, a couple of really poor seasons as well. But Dobbs looks like a guy who, again, a lot of breakout potential. He fits really well with our build. One of the things that we were looking at doing was getting the other side of that week 17 game where we have both Justin Jefferson and TJ Hockenson. If we can build out to where we have that game and it helps us if it shoots out, and then several other games where it helps us if they shoot out, then again, you're looking at the potential to have the overall upside to win the entire tournament, but while doing it with guys that you wanted anyway. And that, I think, is the real key, at least for me, Colm, is that when we're trying to build these overall game stacks, it's just so crucial that they be guys that were already targets.
Yeah, and you mentioned some of the different things going on there, but Dobbs also coming back against the Vikings in week 17, and it feels like, Shawn, we've just built an NFC North team here, trying to pick out as many of those guys with Detroit and the Vikings obviously paired in there, and now some Packers. So it'll be interesting to see how we fill this thing out. At the moment, we have 1 quarterback, 3 running backs, 7 wide receivers, 2 tight ends. It gives a huge amount of flexibility through these last couple of rounds as to what we are going to do here. First question, Shawn, tight ends. I'm probably good to roll through the season with Hockenson and Laporta. Obviously, if an opportunity provides itself, we'll make that conversation around tight end. Do you feel like a 2 tight end build here is set up okay with having a rookie in there with your established veteran?
I do. They have different buys. They both have a lot of upside. we'll just kind of, this team right now, as long as we get Pickett, is set up with a ton of flexibility. We talked about getting those 2 early running backs, and yet we now have built out the wide receiver depth that we need, and we're going to be pivoting back to running back in an area that tends to be favorable. That doesn't mean that you can't get sniped on a bunch of the guys that you're really looking at and get there again in situations late that are a little bit trickier. But this particular build, we can just go in any direction that we want. And so I've got a lot of enthusiasm for the way the team looks at this moment. We'll see if we can finish off these last 5 rounds.
So we're both feeling pretty positive, 9 picks away here in the 14th round before our next 2 selections. One of the advantages, Shawn, when we have a pick at the turn when we're doing these shows, it gives you time to, kind of unwind and talk about the players that we decide after we make those selections. So it does make it a little bit more relaxed. It makes it more relaxed as well when the players that you're hoping to get all are, available to you at that point. So we are waiting to see kind of how the chips fall as we move on. Some of the players that are in the queue over the next kind of 2 rounds potentially of ADP is Chase Brown, Kenny Pickett, who we've talked quite a bit about, Rondale Moore, Chuba Hubbard, who we've talked on a number of different podcasts about at the running back position, then Tyquan Thornton. Then just for legal obligations, we have to have Sam Howell in the queue at most times during the draft, and then Zach Evans would be popping up. But a little bit further down the line, I think, for Howell and Evans. It's going to be interesting, though, Shawn, here. We will, I think, have a couple of players here to give us a conversation around who we would select at this next pick. So 4 picks away, the number of players available to us, the players going off the board, the players that we're happy to see going off the board, even players that we like still now and in previous seasons, the likes of Singletary, Mostert, both going off the board in the last 2 selections. Shawn, I think this is the area where you make the pick on Kenny Pickett if you're doing it. But we have Brown, we have Hubbard, who would both be very good additions to this running back core. And then we also have Rondale Moore, who could fit in with the wide receivers that we have. We have some young wide receivers in there, would give you more veteran depth as well. But what way are you feeling like leaning? I don't want to curse it, but 1 pick away. All those options are available. We're on the clock.
All those options do come up. We know that we want Pickett, so that can be kind of our fallback here. The other 2 guys who are really interesting, Chase Brown, Rondale Moore. This is right where they go by ADP. Moore gives us the week 17 guy with Hurts, and we have very little that we have done opposite him, in part because those Eagles are so expensive. Chase Brown with Cincinnati gives us a mild bring back on our quarterback now for the week 16 game. So either way, this builds out the correlation for this lineup. And again, it does with players that, these are high priority guys for us anyway.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'll let you make the call here. I'm happy with both of those guys. And I think, Shawn's gone running back. I think that based on how the team has been built out so far is the way I would have really heavily leaned. I think also playing the ADP game, it's only a couple of picks that it is after ADP, but there's always that slim chance, Shawn, when somebody like a Rondale Moore, who I don't think gets back to us, there's always that slim chance that, he does slide after ADP, which is right around these next couple of picks, halfway through the 15th round, so mid-15th. And there's always a chance that they could slide back to us. But those 2 picks, I think, really start to fill out this. And we've talked about this a number of times over the last couple of minutes. A lot of flexibility. And that was a pick there where there was a huge amount of flexibility. We could have went all 3 positions, quarterback, running back, or wide receiver. I think the priority there was quarterback and the running back position. How close were you there on Rondale Moore versus Chase Brown? It is pretty close. I think that's really one where if you have 6 wide receivers at that point, I think you're going more. And if you have 7 and I think based on the structure, I think was the breaking point there for me. Was it similar for you?
Yes, the structure there in terms of arguably needing another running back more. You also have this element where, Rondale Moore is such a weird dude in terms of how he's perceived. Obviously, Rondale himself, I think, is probably very normal. But, he got within 1 pick of me in one of my drafts recently at like 35 spots below ADP. And so, I mean, again, once you get into this area of the draft, almost anything can happen. And
Just
yet, if there's a guy who can
spots.
fall through like multiple rounds, it's Rondale Moore, because huge numbers of people don't think that he's even going to be in the NFL next year, I guess. And so, I mean, from that perspective, you're thinking, I mean, he might get back to us. The other side of it is that, I mean, Travion Williams might just be straight up a better pick than Chase Brown, and you could probably put him in the 20th round. The flip side of that is that Travion Williams could just be a straight up better pick than Chase Brown. When you're on the clock with pick 18, if he is the best value and really the main guy you want staring back at you, and you've already taken Chase Brown and you didn't get Rondale Moore as a result, then that part of it you're going to really regret. Everything else, I think, pushed us in the direction of Chase Brown for that pick.
So as we have some pause, Shawn, before we make our next selection, 2 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, 7 wide receivers, 2 tight ends. We have Jaylen Hurts, Kenny Pickett. Then that rolls us into our running backs of Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, Antonio Gibson, Chase Brown. And then at the wide receiver position, Justin Jefferson, Pickens, Johnson, Rashad Bateman. Then we've Jameson Williams, Sky Moore, Romeo Dobbs, and then TJ Hockenson and Sam Laporta. I asked the question earlier about the tight end position. It feels like obviously Sam Howell's there, so we can't give our honest opinion and say that it should be a 2 quarterback build at this point. But it feels like, based on how we've set this up, that if there was a draft that we were to miss out on Sam Howell, this is probably the one.
It probably is the one. And sadly, Rondale Moore does go there at the 188, so he does almost come back to us, but not.
That is about 20
quite
picks after ADP.
It is. So
yeah.
Again, I mean, he'll come back into that range for you, just not quite today. So, Colm, we are now on the clock. Howell is still there, as you referenced. The other pick recently that was disappointing is that Tyquan Thornton does go at 183, so it doesn't really get that close to coming back to us. I think that this is probably 2 rookies, even though, I mean, you would like to get some of that veteran scoring here.
The only
jump in and really.
I think we're good at tight end. Trey McBride would be an option that I would add in if you wanted to go that way, but I do think that Spears is the other pick here. And I know there's tears been shed by the RotoViz OT community as we did pass on Sam Howell. That is not something, Shawn, we have done much in the last 12 months. It's very unusual that we do pass over. So
it is. We had this draft set perfectly to do it. The only player that we ended up with Washington was Antonio Gibson. That's a good selection in isolation, so we don't need to put Sam Howell with him. Colm, I really like the way that this has come out. Probably you don't want those 3 rookie running backs together there late, but Chase Brown, Zach Evans, Tyjae Spears, all 3 of them with a lot of athleticism, all 3 of them with electric playmaking ability, all 3 of them in position to be those guys who benefit in a 0 RB sort of way. We referenced King Cap's team on the show, obviously, multiple times because it was this perfect build, won the regular season $1 million last year. I'm sure he will be in the mix again. And that was a team that benefited from hitting on the right rookie running backs, along with obviously many, many other perfect picks. I like these guys because of the athleticism and because of how close they are to serious opportunity.
Yeah, there is the 0 RB element to it where they are very close to serious opportunity. We could see that potentially at the very start of the season. It may be a case where it takes a little bit of time to come in. One of the things I guess, and we're going to do a kind of bonus show this week where we recap our team, recap some of the other teams that have been sent to us for BBM4 from the RotoViz OT community. And looking through it, looking at Breece Hall, and if he is ready for week 1 versus if he is not, then we could be looking at, we needed those rookies to be on the field and being very involved in week 1. But I do think that, we'll play that out as it goes. But I like the balance that we have been able to create. And the other thing is we're not just, it's not just a case we think all these rookies are going to hit. There is going to be some growing pains. There's going to be some that will potentially bust, and then there's going to be some that do hit. So trying to balance out that exposure and fit it into the roster, I think, makes a lot of sense. One of the other things, Shawn, we haven't talked about it much today, but I'm sure when we're recapping the team on the bonus show that will come out on Saturday on the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed, we're always looking at those young players, the potential ascending players going in, even the likes of Sky Moore going into their second year who have not hit yet, still the potential upside of that. But if you look through this roster, there is a lot of young players, both first and second year guys in the NFL. So another thing to try and target in those drafts. We have one more selection. We are 8 picks away. Sam Howell's still available, Noah Fant's available. Trevion Williams, Shawn, who you talked about earlier, is available, goes in this kind of zone that we're going into now. Shawn has added Allen Robinson to the draft. I didn't know that was possible, that we could add him to the queue, Shawn. I thought he was completely off your draft boards. But since we've set up with the Pittsburgh Steelers and have Kenny Pickett, I think it does make sense to consider him at least, and then Justin Ross for the Kansas City Chiefs in the mix as well. You mentioned Trevion Williams and how things could play out. Dwayne McBride, some more rookies getting added in here to the queue with Izzy Abanikanda as well. Do you think one more running back is the way to go, or do we think we want that extra wide receiver? It does feel like there's more security in the wide receivers we have selected versus the running back, so it might give a little bit of an edge there. But also, as much as I joked about the Allen Robinson potential option, it does get interesting with this particular build.
Yeah, so we're on the clock. Allen Robinson in the queue for all the Robinson fans. It is a good fit. The Seattle game is one that we want to play in terms of that final game as well. So I think that Fant there is interesting. Trevion, Dwayne McBride, Izzy with having Breece Hall early. Who do you like here?
Let's go for Allen Robinson, Shawn, because I don't think we've ever drafted Allen Robinson together. Say it and it shall be done. We have drafted Allen Robinson. We'll see how we look when we review this team. As I mentioned, a bonus episode will be coming out. But Shawn, just for the team in general, we'll take a run through and look at the entire crew as we drafted this particular roster. We start off in that opening round 101. We take Justin Jefferson, followed up by Jaylen Hurts, Breece Hall, TJ Hockenson, Kenneth Walker, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, also Rashad Bateman, Jameson Williams, Antonio Gibson, Sky Moore, Romeo Doubs. Then it's Sam Laporta, Kenny Pickett, Chase Brown, Zach Evans, Tyjae Spears, and then Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson, Shawn, we drafted him. That is a thing that we did today. I think it fits in with this when you're looking at the potential upside of the team to go that direction. But we'll save the full recap for the recap show. Any final thoughts, though, on how this draft went overall? How are you feeling, as we haven't really had the time for the dust to settle and to fully dive into it? But I think this is a pretty fun team. I think it's definitely a very fun team. Actually, I'll go a step above, but I think there's also the upside for a potential tournament play here as well.
There is. And to have Jaylen Hurts empty, not necessarily advised, but interesting. If you're going to do it, it needs to be with a mobile quarterback. We have the mobile QB there. We have the QB2 to play off of him, set to be a breakout player and very well surrounded with weapons. We have a lot of the other breakout players that we like at running back. We have the wide receivers who look like values to us in a vacuum and then fit in well with this particular team. We have a lot of tight end upside on this team, which isn't necessarily as big a priority in 2023 as it has been in some past seasons, but is still something that when you hit on it can have massive league winning and tournament winning upside. Colm, this was a lot of fun. This team has a lot of firepower. It'll be an interesting one and a fun one to track throughout the season.
Yeah, it definitely will be. If you're playing over at Underdog Fantasy, you want to sign up with a new account and get yourself a 100% sign-up bonus up to $100. You can use the code RotoViz while signing up. That will get you 100% sign-in bonus up to $100. It does what it says on the tin. If you are playing in BBM4, that is 4 free entries as you break that down. But Shawn, we are going to come back with a bonus show this week. It's going to come out on Saturday on the podcast feed. It'll come out a little bit later then on the video feed. So if you are interested, and these are ones that are beneficial to see both ways, I think, because obviously the video you can follow along with the draft, but it is available on the audio side. That always comes out a little bit sooner. So subscribe to both the RotoViz YouTube channel. Also, you can subscribe to the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed. Get all the shows once they are available over there. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. My co-host, as always, is Shawn Siegele. Check out all of Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com, including this week dropping a Dynasty workshop piece. Head on over, check those out. And until we are back, have a good one.